as far as utilities go, I mean, the ones that have made the case for nuclear power and managed to force the public to pay for nuclear plants have often done so by claiming that it was the only way to meet future demand, or that it was the best way. Some of the worst offenders who managed to force the public to pay unreasonable costs to build nuclear plants also have long histories of overstating future demand. As we discussed in episode 226, they've raised the specter of blackouts if they aren't given the go-ahead to build another plant. But as you document in your book, the sharp demand increase that they forecast never actually materialized. And nuclear never proved to be the best, let alone the only way to meet that demand. Utilities have simply made the claims, which they often knew were untrue based on their own modeling, that there was no option but to build those plants, and then the regulators and the legislators and everybody who profits from this giant grift complex went along with it.
Absolutely. I think there is a inbuilt incentive for these corporations to exaggerate their need for new power, because consumers in these markets, which are regulated and consumers have to pay whatever the Public Utilities Commission has deemed essential to allow the utility to continue functioning, are forced to pay that. And so the customers compensate the plant owner for all expenditures plus the fixed percentage of those expenditures as profit. And there's an old paper by two economists, Harvey Averch and Leland Johnson, that identified the problem with this arrangement. He said the firm has an incentive to acquire additional capital if the allowable rate of return exceeds the cost of capital. And in other words, if a utility company could borrow money and invest in a project and charge its consumers enough to pay off those interest charges, then it would be tempted to incur such an expenditure regardless of whether consumers need this project.
It's a surprisingly simple observation, but an important one.
Yeah, so they have a good reason to gold plate any project, and nuclear projects are great at that.
Yeah.
And of course, the only problem for these companies is that the project expense must be deemed allowable by the regulatory body. That's a necessary investment. And this is where all this exaggerated demand investments and what I call the lights will go out gambit, like in chess, comes in.
Right.
And so, whether it is Southern or whether it is the UK regulators, anybody will keep saying that we're going to require them. I think in recent years, we've also seen this other argument when citizens groups and other analysts sort of point out that renewables will be a cheaper and a quicker way to deal with this. They will immediately say, oh, renewables are intermittent, and talk about when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. Now, I've been corrected plenty of times by Emery Lovins to immediately add to that renewables are not intermittent, they are variable.
That's right.
And again, in your podcast, I have no reason to explain why that's not a problem and why we can deal with the variability of this. But this is an easy talking point that you hear being used over and over again, and they simply are not interested in any kind of analysis that argues otherwise. So there's a kind of vested interest on the part of both the corporations as well as these regulators to kind of exaggerate the need for power, diminish the actual possibility of meeting that demand with renewables or with energy efficiency and other kind of demand side responses. And therefore, nuclear power becomes a very quote unquote attractive proposition for them.